Welcome, welcome. It's the coughing Piscean here to ponder on the waters above and below. The Great Conjunction Panic of 1524 and the crisis of astrological authority. Subscribe, like, comment, share my videos around. Continue to learn astrology in weird times. So, this video, like we just did, we're going to give an introduction on the prediction for the ages. In the winter of 1524, tens of thousands of Europeans awaited the end of the world. Or if not the end of the world itself, at least a catastrophic deluge that would drown cities, wash away crops, and drown the wicked in a punishment reminiscent of Noah's flood. The cause of this widespread terror was not a new prophecy or a religious revival, but a celestial event. The impending great conjunction of all 7 known planets in the water sign of Pisces, scheduled to occur in February of that year. The Panic of 1524 represents one of the most remarkable episodes in the history of Western astrology, a moment when astrological prediction moved from the courts and universities into the public square, amplified by the new technology of the printing press and debated by everyone from illiterate peasants to the Holy Roman Emperor himself. It was a moment that revealed both the immense cultural authority astrology still possessed in the early 16th century and the cracks that were beginning to appear in that authority. And when February 1524 turned out to be exceptionally mild and dry, it dealt a blow to astrological credibility from which the discipline would never fully recover. In this video, we are going to examine the Great Conjunction Panic of 1524 as a case study in the social history of astrology. We will explore the astronomical and astrological principles that underlay the prediction, the media environment through which it spread, the debates it provoked among intellectuals, and the consequences of its dramatic failure. In doing so, we will see how astrology, at the height of its cultural influence, became entangled with the religious and political conflicts of the Reformation era, and how a single failed prediction could shake confidence in a system of thought that had endured for millennia. Let's observe the actual celestial configuration, right? Which is why 1524 seems so dangerous as a year. So to understand why the Great Conjunction of 1524 inspired such terror, we must first understand what it was and why astrologers viewed it with such alarm. The event in question was a conjunction, an apparent meeting in the sky, of all 5 planets visible to the naked eye: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, along with the Sun and Moon, all in the sign of Pisces. Such a gathering of celestial bodies was exceptionally rare. The last time anything comparable had occurred was in 1484, and before that in 1420, and before that in 1368. A full conjunction of all 7 planets in a single sign was an event of almost unimaginable significance. So Pisces, the sign in which this cosmic gathering was to occur, is a water sign. In fact, it's mutable water. In traditional astrology, each of the 4 elements, fire, earth, air, and water, was associated with certain qualities and certain types of events. Water signs, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces, were associated with moisture, with floods, with the sea, and with all things liquid. A conjunction in a water sign might therefore be expected to produce watery effects: rain, storms, floods, and perhaps a recurrence of the great deluge that had destroyed the world in Noah's time, aka Ark story. So, the presence of multiple planets intensified this expectation. Jupiter and Saturn, the 2 slow-moving social planets, were particularly significant. Jupiter, being the greater benefic, might normally be expected to moderate the conjunction's effects, but in Pisces it was in its exaltation. And I say that just because Jupiter is, it curated Pisces, right? We can say it's exalted in Cancer, though, if you want to be so technical about it, but a position of particular strength, and its influence might therefore be amplified. Saturn, the greater malefic, was in its detriment in Pisces, which, it's more like in Cancer, so that's funny. So it's hard to explain with Pisces, but a position of weakness that might be nevertheless manifest as particularly disruptive and chaotic effects. Because why? Because Saturn is the planet of structure, and we can say that Pisces, it's kind of like when we say Mercury's debilitated in Pisces, because Pisces is overtly spiritual. All right, and we especially see that when Pisces is in the sun, moon, or even the ascendant, let alone someone has a stellium like myself with Pisces in their natal chart. All right. So the conjunction of all 7 planets in a water sign was thus interpreted by many astrologers as a recipe for catastrophe. The waters above and below would unite, and the rains would descend, and the seas would rise. The wicked would be punished, and the world would be purified. Some predicted a literal flood, others a period of torrential rains and devastating storms, others a more metaphorical deluge of water war, of just war in general, and disease and social upheaval, but virtually all agreed that something terrible is coming. Let's talk about the printing press and the propagation of panic. So, what transformed this astrological prediction from a technical matter discussed by specialists into a mass panic was the printing press. Johannes Gutenberg's invention of movable type in the mid-15th century had revolutionized the production and distribution of written text. By the 1520s, printing presses operated in every major European city, producing everything from Bibles and devotional works to political pamphlets and popular almanacs. Astrological predictions were ideally suited to this new medium. They were timely, dealing with imminent events. They were accessible, requiring no specialized knowledge to understand, at least in their simplified forms, and they were commercially viable, appealing to the universal human desire to know what the future held. Astrologers across Europe rushed to print their interpretations of the coming conjunction, competing for readers and for the patronage of the powerful. The result was an explosion of astrological literature. More than 150 separate pamphlets and broadsides predicting disaster for 1524 were published in Germany alone. Some were sober technical treatises filled with charts and calculations aimed at learned readers. Others were sensational broadsides illustrated with woodcuts of drowning cities and terrified crowds, aimed at the popular market. Still others were political, using the conjunction as an occasion to criticize rulers, predict the downfall of the papacy, or warn of coming religious upheaval. Now, this flood of predictions created a self-reinforcing dynamic. The more predictions appeared, the more credible the threat seemed. So many astrologers working independently all arrived at the same conclusion. Surely there must be something to it. The very multiplicity of predictions, which might have revealed the disagreement and uncertainties within astrological practice, was instead interpreted as confirming their validity. The intellectual debate, astrologers against themselves. Not all astrologers, however, agreed with the catastrophic interpretation. The conjunction of 1524 became the occasion for one of the most intense debates in the history of Western astrology, as learned practitioners disagreed about the event's meaning and significance. The most prominent dissenter was Luca Gorico, an Italian astrologer and bishop who enjoyed the patronage of popes and kings. Gorico argued that the conjunction's effects would be less dramatic than popularly supposed. The planets, he noted, would not all be exactly conjunct, but would be spread across the sign of Pisces, weakening their combined influence. Moreover, the presence of Jupiter, the greater benefic, would moderate the malefic effects of Saturn and Mars. Some flooding might occur, Gorico conceded, but not a universal deluge. Other astrologers offered more subtle interpretations. Some distinguished between the conjunction's effects in different regions, noting that its influence would vary depending on local conditions and on the horoscopes of particular cities and kingdoms. Some predicted not literal floods but metaphorical ones, floods of barbarians invading, floods of heresy spreading, floods of blood and war. Some warned that the conjunction's effects might be delayed, manifesting not in 1524 itself, but in the years following. The debate was conducted in print with pamphlets and treaties, answering one another across national and linguistic boundaries. It was, in its way, a model of scholarly discourse, vigorous, engaged, and conducted according to shared rules of evidence and argument. But for the popular audience, the very existence of debate was confusing. If the experts could not agree, how was the ordinary person to know what to believe? The political and religious context, Reformation and Apocalypse. The conjunction of 1524 occurred at a moment of exceptional religious and political tension. Martin Luther had posted his 95 Theses in 1517, and the movement that would become the Reformation was spreading rapidly through Germany and beyond. The Peasants' War, the largest popular uprising in German history before the French Revolution, was brewing in the countryside. The Ottoman Empire under Suleiman the Magnificent was advancing into Hungary and threatening the heart of Christian Europe. In this context, astrological predictions of catastrophe were inevitably read through political and religious lenses. For Catholics, the conjunction might portend the triumph of the true faith over heretics, or it might warn of divine punishment for the Church's sins. For Protestants, it might herald the final downfall of the Antichrist in Rome, or it might call the faithful to repentance and reform. For peasants, it might promise the overturning of the existing order and the establishment of justice on earth. The predictions themselves often took sides. Some astrologers explicitly linked the conjunction to the Reformation, predicting that the flood would wash away the papacy, or that the coming disasters would vindicate Luther's teachings. Others, like the Catholic astrologer Johann Stoffler, whose 1499 prediction of the 1524 conjunction was one of the most widely cited, tried to remain above the fray, offering interpretations that could be read in multiple ways. The conjunction thus became entangled with the apocalyptic expectations that were widespread in early 16th century Europe. The sense that the end of the world was near, that great changes were coming, that the existing order was about to be overturned. All of this was present before the astrological predictions appeared. The predictions did not create these expectations, but gave them a specific form and a specific date, focusing diffuse anxiety into concrete anticipation. The day that never came is February 1524 and its aftermath. February 1524 arrived, and the floods did not. In most of Europe, the month was exceptionally mild and dry. Some local flooding occurred in a few areas, as it always does, but nothing remotely resembling a universal deluge. The predictions had failed. The failure was catastrophic for astrological credibility. Critics, who had always doubted astrology's validity, seized on the event as definitive proof of its falsity. The humanist scholar Giovanni Francesco Pico della Mirandola, whose Disputationes Adversus Astrologiam Divina Trisem, Disputations against Divinatory Astrology, had been published shortly before the conjunction, found his arguments dramatically vindicated. The great reformer Philip Melanchthon, himself an astrologer, had to defend the discipline against those who argued that the failed prediction discredited it entirely. So, we're also going to get into that in another video, Disputations against Divinatory Astrology. We're going to expand on that literature. So astrologers offered various explanations for the failure. Some argued that they had become misunderstood. They had predicted metaphorical floods, not literal ones. Some argued that the prayers of the faithful had averted the disaster, that divine mercy had intervened to spare humanity from what the stars had indicated. Some argued that the calculations had been off, that the conjunction's effects would manifest later, or that other factors in the charts had been overlooked. But these explanations, however ingenious, could not undo the damage. The conjunction of 1524 became a byword for astrological overconfidence, a cautionary tale cited for centuries afterward. The crises of astrological authority. The failed prediction of 1524 did not kill astrology. The discipline continued to be practiced, studied, and taken seriously for centuries to come. But it did mark a turning point, a moment when astrology's cultural authority was publicly and dramatically challenged. What made the failure so damaging was its public nature. Earlier astrological predictions had failed, of course, but their failure had been private, witnessed only by the astrologer and his patron. The printing press changed this. The predictions of 1524 were published far and wide, read by thousands, discussed in taverns and marketplaces. When they failed, the failure was equally public, equally widely known. Astrology could no longer hide its mistakes. The conjunction of 1524 also revealed the tensions within astrological practice itself. The public debate among astrologers, which might have been seen as evidence of intellectual vitality, was instead seen as evidence of confusion and uncertainty. If the experts could not agree, how could anyone trust their predictions? The unified voice that had given astrology its authority in earlier centuries was shattered. In the centuries that followed, astrology would never again command the universal respect it had enjoyed in the Middle Ages and Renaissance. It would retreat from the universities, abandoned by the intellectual elite, and find refuge among the popular almanacs and the private practice of those who still found meaning in the stars. The flood that did not come in 1524 had, in its way, washed away something real. The assumption that the stars spoke with a single authoritative voice about the fate of nations and the destiny of humanity. In my next video, for our final essay on global generational disasters, we're going to talk about the return of history, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction of 2020, and the persistence of astrological thought. I hope to see you there with peace and love. Piscean out.